by an artist named P.P., which depicts this famous scene in the story of Ruth. In the painting, Ruth is clinging to Naomi, while Orpah has turned to go back home. Orpah's path leads her back toward wheat and sunshine, while a new and completely unknown path is unfolding before Naomi and Ruth. The painting illuminates well the tragic choices that these women must make. In a very real sense, if Orpah stays with Naomi, she will likely die. If she goes home, as Naomi wishes, she will live. Simple. She plays it safe. Who can blame her? But Ruth, for reasons that are never revealed, chooses to completely let go of the known path and walk with Naomi into new and unknown territory. Today's passage from the book of Ruth is a familiar one. At least the part about where you go, I will go, etc. We hear these lines often at weddings, which makes sense. They're good wedding words. But I sometimes wonder how many people are actually aware that these biblical words are the words of a daughter-in-law being spoken to her mother-in-law. Naomi didn't have everything, but she had enough. She had the family she needed to provide for her security. And by family, I do mean men. In ancient Israel, a woman could not own property or provide a living for herself. Marriage was how she made her living. And as a married woman, she was considered the property of her husband. And then there was Plan B, which was to give birth to sons as quickly as possible. That way, if her husband passed away, one of her sons would provide for her. Naomi had traveled with her husband and sons from Bethlehem to Moab because of a famine. Her sons married two nice Moabite girls, and life was good. Naomi was secure. But then, in one of those famous biblical twists, Naomi's husband and two sons died. Within 2 verses, and through no fault of her own, Naomi's security vanishes. Just like that, it's gone. Naomi is left with 2 daughter-in-laws, Ruth and Orpah, but they can't provide any security. So not only is she grieving, her survival is at stake too. Naomi is a vulnerable, unprotected widow in a foreign land. Her only option is to go home to Bethlehem and try to find some family members who will provide for her. And even that is not guaranteed. For Naomi, this predicament is extreme wilderness. Have you ever found yourself in a place like that? A place where you feel as though you've lost everything and there's no way forward? Or the only way forward is murky and uncertain? I notice that we're feeling that a lot lately in the life of our church. Like we've lost so many members lately that our survival is at stake. And the way forward is unclear. Naomi turns her face resolutely toward Bethlehem. She saw it as her only means for survival. She told her daughter-in-laws to stay in Moab, to go back to their home villages, back to their families. She had nothing left to offer them but the freedom to find new husbands. One daughter-in-law did the sensible thing. She said a fond and tearful farewell to Naomi and then returned home. But not Ruth. Her love for her mother-in-law was just too strong. She clings to Naomi and offers that famous speech. Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Naomi lets Ruth return with her, but she's bitter and full of despair. She even tells the women back home to call her Mara, which means bitter. But Ruth loves Naomi anyway and looks after her needs. The story of Ruth and Naomi is a classic biblical wilderness story. Wilderness stories are stories about times of crises, times when life is dry and barren. The Bible is full of them, starting with Abraham and going all the way through to the Saul and Paul story. Most people see this as a story about love, but before it's anything else, this is a wilderness story with love as its salvation. We all have wilderness stories: a diagnosis of cancer, the death of a spouse or child or some other loved one, the loss of a job or a home or a marriage. And I would argue that entire tribes and communities and institutions have wilderness stories, times when entire groups of people wandered the wilderness together. And I would suggest that the church as a whole, and Plymouth in particular, is experiencing a wilderness story right now. But if you notice, the wilderness of Naomi was not placed at the end of the story. It was at the beginning, where it could lead to a whole new thing. And that's what happened. Wilderness stories always start at the beginning. They may give you a little vignette as to how things looked before the wilderness, but the story always begins at the tip of the wilderness, and the story is always the journey through the wilderness. And that is where we are right now. The church, all of it. We are at the beginning of our wilderness story, positioned right at that perfect spot for being led to a whole new thing. Together, Ruth and Naomi journeyed through the wilderness to Bethlehem, where they found security thanks to their own cleverness and the kindness of a man named Boaz, and the power of self-giving love, and the grace of God woven into the midst of it all. In her book, An Altar in the World, Barbara Brown Taylor says that the central claim of the Incarnation is that God trusted flesh and blood to bring divine love to earth. Divine love is love that clings to us, love that is loyal and that gives to us above and beyond what we deserve, love that is willing to risk and sacrifice for our sake. Divine love is love that gives undivided attention and takes the time necessary to offer it. And the only way to find that kind of divine love here on earth is to look to human beings, to look to each other. Ruth was a vision of divine love enfleshed. And as Naomi stood there facing her wilderness, Ruth stood there with her. She didn't show up later in the story to save the day. She was there all along, walking side by side with Naomi every single step of the way. And they made it through to something new, something good, something enduring. They made it together. Ruth eventually becomes one of those in the grand genealogy of Jesus. She shows up in Matthew's gospel, one of just 4 women mentioned in Jesus' family tree. Her willingness to uproot and move to a new land ensured her a place in the great story of our faith. My friends, our wilderness story has begun. Like the women in the painting of Heike, we are faced with difficult choices. Do we move forward together in our ministry, into the great unknown, into new, unforeseen, and uncharted territory? Or do we return to safety alone? Returning to safety might sound like the smart thing to do. And for those of us who are tired, it might sound like the easiest and the best thing to do. But we have to remember, Ruth doesn't do it all. She does one thing what anyone deserves. She is present when she doesn't have to be there. That's all. In order to be present, she lets go of plenty and she takes risk. She embodies divine love as Christ embodies divine love, as we embody divine love when we truly pay attention to those we know and love who are walking through the wilderness with us. When we give the simple gift of our presence, God's presence comes through us to heal, to strengthen, and to love each other through the most difficult times of life. God is always ready to partner with us in this work, always ready to shine through us and give us hope. The task is simple: being fully present, and the result can change lives, including our own. We haven't met them yet, and maybe we never will, but one day, future generations will occupy this sanctuary that we hold so dear to our hearts. And they will remember those of us who navigated this wilderness story together, walking side by side with each other every single step of the way. May it be with you all, according to God's word. Amen. And now let us turn to page 4 in our hymnals and join together.